So we have an O&E. So all title companies should be able to give you an O&E. It tells you who is actual onus, legal description, and the title work will tell you also what kind of liens that would be against it, as a first or second. On that sheet you can get from the title company on an app and prepare, or they can prepare it. With things that are going on now, I'd ask if you could download the net sheet, have that prepared, and learn how to do that, because you can do it on an app and you just fill in certain things. Other things are still there. Public records are from RE Colorado, that you go into Realist and get the name and legal description of the property. And then we're going to talk about the listing agreement, and we'll talk about working definitions and seller advisory, seller's property disclosure, water source. Even though the water source is in your seller's property disclosure, I want a separate one, so there's no doubt about where the water comes, and it's a separate document that a seller has to sign and a buyer has to sign. Square foot, closing instructions, you have the seller sign that, and then you give that to the buyer later. Once you have inputted into the MLS printout sheet, once you go active, you upload that. And once all of these things are done, then you upload for me to review. Once you go, Amy, go down just a little bit. Once you go under contract, then your following documents will come from what the seller has signed. You get a copy of the MLS printout sheet that is under contract. You have a contract that's buy and seller is presented to you, a counter if at all. Earnest money receipt, and I'm going to give you a side note. A lot of the title companies are going to have you wire. They're giving wiring instructions for that to be done, but contact your local ref to see if that is one thing that the title company that you're dealing with is doing. You have, once your inspection and objection are completed, then you upload your under contract documents, and then you have, that's where the seller has signed everything, you've agreed to all objections, and you've resolved. Then you have the buyer will have signed all of the seller's property disclosure, square foot, source of water addendum. Closing instructions will be signed at that time also. If there are any documents that are amend extend, you can upload those at that time also. DAs and green sheets at the bottom. Green sheets are in command under commission. And then when you close, you give all copies of the closing documents, closing checks, and the sold MLS. You can go down, Amy. On the first page, at the top, we have seller's agency. That seller agency is what we signed as we represent the seller, only as, because we're listing it and we only represent those sellers. Number 2.1 is your multi-person firm, and that one is always checked. Then on number 3, you've got your seller's name, which comes off of the real estate tax with their legal name on it, and it'll have in your program for CTME or .loop, it'll already auto-populate the name of the agency and your name. Number 3.4 is the legal description of the property and the address, which comes off of your real estate tax. That way you have everything that's checked. Now please make a note of 3.5. It's a question that you always ask a seller to find out if they got any original assistance from when they purchased the house. So it could be, did you get something from a county that gave you money? Did you get assistance from CHAFA that you have to pay back? Or did you get an assistance that some kind of assistance that you have to pay back? If there was something, we need to have that box checked. and make sure that it's not attached to the house and has to be paid back, because that will lower the amount of equity that a seller receives. Then on 3.7, you always have a listing period that is at least 6 months. Maybe with the things that are going on, 6 months may not be enough. It's an evaluation at the time that things are happening, okay? So now you've got a situation where you wanted at least 6 months. Now you go down to the paragraph of 3.9.2. You want to put in there will or will not. It's either up to you if you want that. That's okay. Then on 4, you've got your broker relationships. These are things I would encourage you to read and understand to know what they're going to do. Then you go to 4.3.1.2. This one is seller only. Check that box. You represent the seller. That is all you do. You don't represent the buyer. 5, paragraph 5 is your duties as an agent. You cannot change any of these duties. As an agent, you need to understand what they are and what you need to do with them. Just be familiar with them. You don't have to memorize them, but understand that that's what your requirements are. Now, when you go to paragraph 6, these are the duties that are additional 3 duties that you have when you check the box seller agent. If you're going to get fired, this is where you're going to get fired because you haven't done something that the seller perceives you should have done, seeking the right price, promoting their interest, and etc. But those would be the 3 areas you could possibly be fired from. On number 7 is the amount of percentage that you're going to have as a whole. Now, 7.11, if you take a listing that is less than 5.6, you have to get approval from me. Preferably you send me an email so I can give you an answer in writing, and you're going to explain to me why you need to go below that point. Now we're going to give 2.8 to a listing selling agent, whether they're a transaction broker or a buyer's agent. Now 7.1.3, I always put in none. Let me give you at the bottom of CTME, and I think you can do the same with DocuSign. You remove all the NAs. Your contract never has any NAs in it, your listing contract or your buy-sell. But if you remove them at the bottom, and as you go through, make sure you don't have anything. And in 7.1.3, we put none at this time to be very clear what we're doing. Now, 7.2.3 is your holdover clause. That means that as a seller, X number of people walk through that I personally showed, and I gave them a list if we don't come to an agreement and we have to terminate our listing. We want to make sure you guys get paid on that. Now, paragraph 8, you have 8 and 9 are what you have as your compensations when you do it. Number 9 is where you want to check the box will on 9.11. Yes, you will put it into multi-listing services. Yes, you will have it in more than one exchange. Number 9.2, you want to put down the word none. And then you check the boxes on 914, 915 as will, because you're going to put it in the internet. Now, please make a note that on 9.2.1 is electronic lockboxes. Please check that. We do have a few left. If you belong to the Smedra board, I have some extra boxes. I think we have a few. You have to make a date, set an appointment with Amy, but we have a few left. But I would highly encourage you to do this because it does play into our safety with E&O. We know who goes in, we know what time they do that, and those types of things. Then on other instructions, I always put down, must call the seller for showing time. We don't ever want a seller to come home and not know that somebody is in their house. So we want to be sure that they get a call, and showing time will have that instructions. And with the new types of, with this virus that's going around, it could be, can I have a showing? Are you going to be there? Do you need booties on your feet? One at a time going through the house. There's maybe some different instructions that we normally don't do, but please honor, if you're a seller, please make sure that the seller is comfortable with whatever those instructions are, and that you convey them to the showing agent also. Now on 922, you want to check only the box that says actively licensed real estate broker. This is very important, because when your selling agent calls you and says, hey, my inspector's going over, you always want to say, are you accompanying the buyers with them, and are you with them? If the answer is no, you have to say a licensed person, whether it's your assistant or you, has to be with those buyers, because that's what the instructions are in your listing agreement here, okay? So now we go to paragraph 9.3.1. That one is, excuse me, the following instructions. You want to put this in so you're not boxing yourself into any kind of marketing program. All professional marketing services offered by the brokerage firm as broker deems necessary. That is really important, because if you have a house that's 3,000 square feet versus a 1,000 square foot condo, those items are different. They're not the same. So we don't want you doing something for a condo you would do for a larger house. This way you have a way to discern which ones you might want to be using. And then none on 9.3.2, and we put none on that. So here's that paragraph, is if the instructions from the seller says, please don't take a picture of my child's room, then the photographer will know that they cannot do that. You must convey that to the photographer of the room's interior, exterior. If you're going to use a drone, make sure you have permission from either side of that seller to do it, because their house will be in that drone picture. So for now, I would make sure that you get all that permission. So now we go down to 10.3, very important. You ask the question, is there a listing in place right now? And normally there should be no, but ask the question anyway, because they may have called you and said, hey, my listing is going to expire and I need to go and list after it expires. Your questions are, 1, do you have a copy of your listing? 2, when does it expire? And have you told your other agent you want to withdraw? Because there's some other things that have to be done to make sure that there's not double listings, okay? So now we're going down to 11 for pricing and terms. Now we have a price. We have to figure out, okay, $350 falls into the category. Somebody could pay cash, somebody can be conventional, somebody could be FHA, somebody can be VA. But if you've got a house that's like $450, $500, that's not going to fall into FHA and VA loans. So you would only check cash and conventional. So make sure you know what the ceilings are with these loan programs. On 11.3, the loan discount points, none at this time, because the seller doesn't have a contract to evaluate whether they're going to pay anything if asked, okay? 11.4 is, if you have a VA and FHA loan, there are costs that those buyers cannot pay. I would put in $350, and then you put down, the seller shall decide at the time of an offer if any seller concessions are to be given, because right now you don't have an offer to make that decision. And then you want to be sure you cap whatever those fees might be. And sometimes they're as low as 50, sometimes they're as high as 500, depends on the lender. And now on 11.5, you've got earnest money deposit, and that money is evaluated. I got a $350,000 house. I want to make it painful if they had to lose their earnest money, but I don't want to make it so painful that they can't come up with that money. So 3,000 to 5,000 is a good one. The higher you go up, if there's a dispute, the higher the court costs will be. So be aware of what you've got. Be sensible on what it is. And then 11.6 is how does the seller want to get their funds at the time of closing. I think you can do a cashier's check, but I haven't said this in a past, but electronic wiring might be a good idea, or funding, but no wiring instructions by emails. It has to be by phone and directly talking to the title company. You are not involved. Now on 11.7, the question that you ask is not as you are a U.S. citizen. I mean, the question that you ask are you a U.S. citizen? It doesn't mean that because you came from a foreign country that you can't be a U.S. citizen. But this is important to ask that question. Not that if you have a green card, not if you have any of those others. If the answer is no, I'm not a citizen, then check the box on FERPA down here on 11.7. I am a foreign national. There are other documentations that come from the title company that the seller has to fill out, and those taxes will be deducted from the proceeds at the time of closing. The same with 11.8. That will also, if they don't live in the house more than, if this is not their primary residence, there will be a 2% tax taken out from the state at the time of closing. And we want to make sure that those sellers understand 11.7, 11.8, because that can affect what their bottom line might be, that hence why you do a seller's net proceeds sheet. Then on 13, you go and check if on the paragraph towards the end, you see leased items. If none of those things are in the property, please check the box none. This way we know there are no leased items, and then we know that we've got everything covered. If something is leased, then you start getting the copy of the lease documentation so that you can give it to a buyer and you're prepared. Then on paragraph 13.14, on 13, going back up, 13.13 is where you have any items. Did you have that new refrigerator that you got? Is it free and clear? Do you always want to put the word none? And if there are new appliances that you see or something, you ask, hey, listen, are these all paid off? Because there could come a lien that the seller doesn't know about. On 13.14, this is where you list, okay, it has a refrigerator, it has that stove, microwave, ice maker in the basement, etc. This is where you list those things that are going to stay in the house. All the curtains and the rods will stay, that type of thing. Then 13.1.5.1 is there are no leases, you put none. And then 13.2 is where you put, okay, most of the time it could be a washer and dryer excluded, and you make sure you know where it is. So if there's a big enough house that has two, which ones are staying and which ones are going. Then on 13.3, the word none should be put into that paragraph where you see it, not NAs, none. 13.4, I have you fill this out. It's not that you can't see that 3-car garage with that house, but if you are used to filling this paragraph out, when you list a condo, you're going to say, hey, do you have underground parking? Do you have a reserve parking? Do you have a garage that conveys with the property? So that's how I want you to fill that paragraph out, because you want to be sure that you don't miss anybody getting a garage or anything of that nature. On 13.51 is none. Rarely on the 13.5, 2, 3, and 4, and 6 is all those words are none. generally what happens is those properties are not going to have those things unless you're going out into the, say Parker, Elizabeth, those types of areas, something with land and acreage. 14 is your encumbrances. So the reason you do your O&E to find out what liens are against the property is so you can fill out paragraph 14.4. That paragraph has to be filled out as you see it, or I'm going to reject your listing paperwork, because we want to be sure we know when you fill it out and you do a seller's proceeds sheet, you make sure you got approximately what those amounts are. It's not, this comes off of the public records. It's not going to be super accurate, but it's going to be close enough. And this way, if they've been in the house a long time and they know the balance, then you can put the balance in there. But at this point, that's what we want in there so that we can start getting the right number in our seller's proceeds sheet. Now we go down to paragraph 14.5, and there, if this is not a rental, we put the word none. On 16 is where we ask the seller, hey, listen, do you have a homeowners association? If you do, what is it, and what's the monthly fee, quarterly fee, or yearly fee? Put that in there. And if there, you always ask, did you get a letter if there's special assessments, especially on condos and townhomes and things like that? Is there a special assessment? If it's a special assessment, fine. And you want to always, as a listing agent, put the word none. If there's an assessment, you want a copy of that assessment letter, because those are documents that have to go to a buyer. So then the question you want to ask on this paragraph is, on our buy-sell contract in paragraph 7, Mr. Seller, we have to give a lot of documents regarding the HOA to a buyer. The easiest way to obtain these, you probably can't get them all, is through a title company. The cost is somewhere between $100 and $200. And this way, we know we've given them the most accurate things, information we can give them. 17, we don't put any date in there because we don't know what that is. And if I put it down as mutual agreement, because when the contract comes in, you and the buyer are going, the seller are going to agree on what date and time and place and all of that they're going to have. Do we need a post-closing? What kind of documentation do we need? And we don't know that yet because we don't have a copy of a contract yet. 18.2.1 is the seller's property disclosure agreement. Rarely do you not have one filled out. Once in a great while, you'll have it filled out because the documentation would say, excuse me, would be, say, for an estate sale, they may not fill one out. A fix and flip, I would encourage them to fill it out. But most of the time, there should always be a seller's property disclosure. Then we go down to 18.2, lead-based paint is our next one. If this is a house that falls under lead-based paint qualifications, which means January 1st, 1978, one document has to be filled out. We want to get that filled out along with seller's obligation, lead-based paint obligation for sellers, and the lead-based paint disclosure. We don't have a carbon monoxide disclosure. However, all houses have to have a carbon monoxide detector with it within 15 feet of the sleeping area. So if you have a hallway, it's got to be every 15 feet, there has to be a carbon monoxide detector. And I would suggest strongly they get one on every floor, basement, main level, and upper floor. Then we go to paragraph 19 through basically go to paragraph 27. Those are things that everybody needs to read to make sure that the seller, you know, basically these are just telling them what happens. Mediation might have to get an attorney, which we don't want to do, but these are things that you should be aware as a listing agent that might come up. 27, you want to put in, I always put in there if I have a listing, if I have a transaction coordinator, I put their name in there, their phone number, who's handling the fee that's going to be paid, and it'll be paid at closing, that type of thing. Then on paragraph 29, I list the seller's property disclosure, square foot, seller's advisory, common interest community checklist if there's an HOA, closing instructions, seller's proceed sheet, lead-based paint obligation, and sales if it applies. If there's no HOA, you're not going to have a common interest community checklist. You will have the other documents. If it is not falling into the lead-based paint category, you won't have that either. So at that point, you're pretty much at the end. Again, you go through paragraphs 31 through 35. That pretty much tells you what other items happen in a contract. Read those over and be familiar. You sign it, and the seller signs with, make sure the seller's legal description or legal name is on this contract. Now, our next document that you're going to see is called a definition of working relationship. This document is a document the attorney has prepared, and all buyers and sellers do sign that. It tells about a seller about, okay, I'm going to represent you as a seller's agent, and then everybody signs, and how it's filled out on how you get it to them. They sign it. You delivered it on this date. Go down, Amy. You deliver it on this date, and you have your signature, and how did you deliver it via email or however you've given it to them. Our next document is called Seller Advisory. This is a document that's 3 pages long, and it tells the seller, hey, buyers are entitled to inspections. There could be a FERPA issue. You could have a insurance issue. This is a document prepared by the attorney that the seller signs so that they understand what might come through. Could be fraud. We might be asked for a home warranty. We have rules for MLS that have to be done, and those types of things. Then our next document is square foot disclosure. This comes off of the public records. We check it. We don't have an we didn't measure. And I encourage you not to do that. We come from the assessor's office, and you put in there. Normally they're not right, but if the buyer doesn't like it, they get to measure. Our next document is source of water. Please fill this out appropriately, even if it's a condo. On number 2, it's the HOA, but within the HOA, you have a name, you have an address, and you can give them a website that could give them information of where the water comes from. Please don't put just HOA in there. The next document is a seller's property disclosure document. This is only filled out by a seller, never by you. And it is 7 pages, 7 pages long, front and back. But this is a document that the seller goes through and says, yep, it's there, I have, or I don't know, or make a comment. If there's an age, great. If you don't know, don't put anything in. Then this is where the seller is the one that does this, not you as the agent. This is a document that the buyers take with them when they go to the house to do their inspection. The next document is closing instructions. Closing instructions you want to fill out as you see it. These are the Colorado State approved. Most of the title companies are using these closing instructions. It's rare that the title company is using something different because these were prepared by attorneys and real estate attorneys and the title attorneys. fill it out as you see it. On line 16 is where you put the date of a contract that comes in on your property. Put that date in there, and then you send it over to have the buyer sign, not before that date goes in there. Don't forget to put it in. Then most of the stuff you see, what I would encourage you to do is go, Amy, go to paragraph 5, please. 5 is got a fee in there. Call your title company and ask what the closing fee is, because you're closing the real estate side and the loan side. There's a fee for that, and it's usually half and half. So be sure you check on that before you put a number in there. Then we go to paragraph 16. Then paragraph 16 is just if you have some special instructions or something of that nature. Normally there isn't a whole lot in there, but there could be something in there. Let's say it's an estate sale and how does, or divorce, and how is those proceeds going to be split. So when you go farther down, all parties sign. I would encourage you to get this signed early and not at the closing table. There are many listing agents that want this signed at the closing table, but I would encourage you to get it to sign as quickly as possible. That way there's no question about the document being signed, and you will not be asked to sign something different at closing. Now our next document is lead-based paint obligation for seller. So if this house falls into the category of lead-based paint deadlines or dates, then a seller fills out this document, lead-based paint disclosure, and the next document, lead-based paint for sales. Both of these documents are done. They check the boxes appropriately, and then when a buyer comes along, we send the lead-based paint sales to them. Our next document is called a seller's estimated net sheet. The CTME has this in there. Get an app, get the app, make sure you practice on the app. All sellers must have a proceed sheet or I will not approve your file, based on the fact that you've got to have the seller know what approximate cost that might be. You might have to put in there that they have to pay taxes to the state and tax to the government under FERPA, or Colorado, this may not be their house. There's a whole lot of things that you might put in there, but generally this is what goes in, unless that box on FERPA is checked, and then there's some other issues that come with it. But that's why you want to have this done. Title company will do it for you, and they will send it to you via email. Your next document is Common Interest Community Checklist, and this is filled out again only by the seller. This is additional information for the buyer. There is no signature page, but it's also giving them information on what HOA facilities are there, along with the information on 1 or 2 or 3 HOAs. This helps a buyer, excuse me. Now, the last document is more of an FYI document, or not the last one, but this document is if the buyers of your listing are not going to have a inspection or not taking a home warranty, one of these 2 boxes would be checked. If they're not going to do it, I'd really encourage you to be sure you get this document done. If they're going to do it, you don't need to have it done. But if for some reason they say, nah, we're going to pay cash and we're taking it as is, I'd like to encourage you to use this document, because it is in your CTME, because this way they can't come back to you and say, hey, you didn't say I didn't get an inspection and you defrauded me. This is a cover for you, but it also says, hey, you guys didn't want it, so here's a signature. The next document is a document it's about septic use permits. If your property has a septic tank on it, you have to have this usage permit. I would encourage you to get that done as quickly as you can, and make sure you have it ready, because no lender is going to close without this document. The next document is telling you if you're selling your own property. These are the 4 things you have to do. You have to have seller's property disclosure, a home warranty, a home inspection, and use the Colorado State approved forms. And with that said, that is how you do it. The next document down is that you have what they call your O&E insurance. If, God forbid, we have to take you to mediation or defend your position, you have a deductible of $2,500, but you have to have done all 3 of these things on your personal resident. Your E&O insurance is a $2,500 deductible. So that's why I would like to have, if they don't choose to have an inspection or a home warranty, that document signed, which helps you a great deal. And the last document we have basically is, if you have a well, it's just a checklist for you guys to give a seller and encourage them to have a yes and no. It's just knowledge for a well if needed. Now, the last thing I'm going to tell you is that if you want to have these documents sent in 3 forms, the first grouping that you want, 2, the first group you want to send is your listing agreement, your seller's property disclosure, and your definitions of working relationship. You send that group to a seller, go through that with them, and have them sign. Once those documents are signed, the next group you send over are going to be your seller's property disclosure, your square foot disclosure, your closing instructions, and I've lost track of what my last one was. But the next ones are all the disclosures that you need. So those next documents, don't give a seller all of these documents at one time. It's too confusing for them, and you'll have nothing but trouble. So you want to be sure you do it in 2 segments and break it down and make sure you've got everything organized for them. If you're using a transaction broker, transaction coordinator, they usually send it, but encourage them to send them into 2 groups. This way you don't have any problems or any concerns, because it's confusing for the seller, and you want to be sure we don't confuse them any more than they already are most of the time. Does anybody have any questions of me? If you do, go ahead and just email me your questions, and I will see you next week for contracts.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Donna.